Welcome to another edition of Political Breakfast right here on WABE. We are so glad that you are joining us today, as always. And both of our strategists are here, Republican strategist Brian Robinson and Democratic strategist Tharon Johnson. Hello and happy Monday to both of you. Our producer, Lily Oppenheimer, is here as well. We're off to a great start this week and a busy start as well. So good to see all of you here.
Another fun week in Georgia politics. No shortage of things to talk about.
Oh, for sure. What you reading over there, Tharon? It looks like you're taking in some breaking news over there.
It is nonstop. You're absolutely right. I mean, this is what me and Brian and even you guys on Live Edition, Lisa, I'm sure that you guys are getting inundated with requests and people coming out. But no, Georgia right now is just on fire with all these candidates announcing and just the broom sort of chatter about when people are going to announce and how people are responding. And Brian and I, we talk about this a lot. People listen to this podcast for two reasons. One, they want to be informed factually and hear a civil debate. But two, we always have to make sure we get our sources and we have to double check, like, okay, are you sure this is happening? Or, hey, like, what are you hearing here? And so, yes, Lisa, I'm getting a bunch of those text messages this morning for a bunch of people who are making sure that I got the information right this time.
Yeah, well, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Derek Dooley may get in, and it is official now. Derek Dooley is the latest Republican to jump into the race, hopefully to be the Republican challenger in the Senate race against Senator Jon Ossoff. So it is official now. What are your thoughts on that? You both knew it was coming, right?
Sure. They've telegraphed this for 2 months, which actually has allowed some of their opponents to begin to define Derek Dooley before he got into the race. And I've told Dooley's team that. I was like, before they announced today, I said, I understand not rolling him out too soon. He is an outsider. Those folks do need to learn how politics works. They need to be trained. Just like I can't wake up tomorrow morning and be like, I'm going to be a head coach in college football, right? I can't do that, and they can't come be in my business without getting a little background. So they were right to train him up, and we'll see how effective it is. The rollout video was good. It introduced us to him. It reminded us that he is from here, even though his career has really taken him around the country. And he told us that he's going to be a Trump Republican in the Senate. And that was something I was anxiously looking to see. How would they handle this Trump dynamic when Trump isn't going to be with them? And we know that. And we're already seeing a lot of national publications who are trying to make this into a proxy war between Trump and Kemp, because we all know that's way more interesting than a bunch of guys whose names we don't know as well. So Derek Dooley, in addition to those three things that he wants to accomplish, I'm from here, I'm a Trump Republican, and here's who I am, here are my values. He's also got to show that this isn't Loeffler 2.0, that this isn't Herschel Walker 2.0. And he certainly looks like he has great camera presence in his video. We will see how he does on his feet. We haven't seen him taking questions. We haven't seen him speak long form in podcast interviews, for example. Let's see how he does once we've dug past this first level of him as a candidate. I think because his opponents have done a good job defining him as a failed football coach. That is the thematic of the Dooley's Volunteers website that his opponents put up. He's a failed football coach, and he hasn't lived in Georgia his adult life, that he didn't register as a Republican when they lived in Florida and his wife did, that he didn't vote in 2016 and 2020. Those are ways they're defining him. I think this week, much more so than any other candidate, is critical for Derek Dooley. He's got to, to use a gymnastics term, like run down that little pad, hit the jumping thing, catapult over that little horse thing they have. I don't know the terms, and then land on both feet and raise his hands in the air. It's got to be like a perfect 10 landing this week. And I think it's hugely important. If he can do that, I think this could get really interesting.
There, I was going to say, didn't they train Herschel Walker, and that didn't work, right? So what's happening here?
Well, first of all, B-Rob with this metaphor, what is that actual event called in gymnastics? All of us have been watching the Olympics. What is it called?
Is it the vault? The vault.
The vault? I think
The
it's called
vault.
the vault. Okay,
Yes,
there you
the
go.
vault.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, I'm imagining Derek Dooley in my head with that perfect hairline.
When you
with
land.
yeah.
Yeah.
Doing
Oh, good hair. That's right there.
good hair.
Good point.
Come on, B-Rob. You got to give the man the good hair.
That's right. Good
test.
hair.
Lisa, look, Brian has a tough week, and I'm going to have some tough weeks ahead, right? Because clearly the Republican side has just been chaotic, right? I call it a hot mess. I mean, with him jumping in this race now, it's going to even more like complicate things for the GOP in Georgia. Let's just talk about this for a second. I don't believe Governor Brian Kemp would, on his way out with a legacy right now that's intact, right? He's a good governor going out, would push all his chips to the middle table, would go all in with Derek Dooley if he did not think that he could win. The problem is what B-Rob just described, is when you allow the Collins folks and other GOP operatives to define you, and the failed football Tennessee coach, it's direct to the Republican base, right? They're already saying, yeah, you're a Dooley, but you didn't coach at Georgia like your daddy, and you went to Tennessee. And I did the research, and correct me if I'm wrong, B-Rob, he was fired from there back in 2012.
Yeah.
So the question
He
you got to
lasted
ask
2
yourself
years.
is,
Yeah.
what has he been up to these last 13 years? And what B-Rob just kind of talked about was, and it's the same on the Democratic side, right? I always tell people, you may not like what I say, you may not like how I say it, but you can't ever take away the blood, sweat, and tears that I poured into this party in Georgia, right? I've been doing this since 2002. So folks know where I've been. I've been on this podcast and other, things, and out there carrying the message. The question is, where has he been these 13 years? And so I'm back to BK, Brian Kemp, the governor. I just think, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, he had to invite him to the house. Maybe they went hunting. We know like the governor likes to drink Budweisers. I'm sure they had a few 6-packs. And the way I know Brian Kemp, the way you know him, I guarantee he had to say, all right, Derek, my high school buddy, right? They both went to Clark Central High School. Shout out to the Gladiators in Athens, Georgia. Hey, man, if you're going to do this, this is the checklist. And so I don't think there's any way they get off that backyard with those Budweisers, or maybe they were at the range shooting, together, or whatever. They were maybe having a nice bottle of wine, but I think the governor likes to drink beers. And he walk out of there and say, all right, Derek, you answered all my questions correctly. I have faith in you, brother. I'm going to go against the president, and I'm going to call these other 2 or 3 candidates who are thinking about running, and tell them I'm with you. Like, B-Rob, I just don't think that happens unless the governor had to have some indicators, Lisa, that this man is ready for the challenge.
Yeah.
Now, back to what he's got to do now that he's announced. I'm hearing from sources, and I've said this on the podcast, that he has been prospecting a lot. And I think the money is going to roll in. I think the money is one of the big questions that the governor asked Derek Dooley when they were having those beers, and said, hey, man, can you go out and raise 20, 30, 40, $50 million? So he had to check that box. But because we're in this MAGA extremist culture right now in the Republican Party, he's going to have to pass the Trump test. How aligned are you to Trump? So what we saw, Lisa, in his video and his website already, he's already saying, I'm on board with everything that Trump is doing. So he knows that you cannot blink, you cannot waver. If you're not with the Trump agenda, it's going to be a failed start from the beginning. But how he articulates it, how he looks when he's saying it, and how authentic it is, Lisa, is going to be the test. That is going to be the bar. But I just believe, and Brian, jump in here, I just don't think the governor would risk it all. Knowing what he learned from Kelly Loeffler, who, by the way, was a pick that he stood by, he supported her, she became a U.S. Senator. I just think that he had to learn from that. He's a 2-term governor. He's got aspirations after this. I'm sure Marty had to. Maybe Marty wasn't drinking Budweiser. I don't know if Marty drinks or not. I want to put the first lady out there like that, but I know that
I've seen it happen. I have seen it
Don't
happen.
There you go.
Don't
So
do that.
when they were having those Budweisers, Lisa, by the time they got to that 12th can, I just think that Marty had to look at him in the eyes and say, all
12
right, Derek,
cans,
you're going to do
come
this.
on. Well, there's a lot in the name, in the Dooley name. But even so, the endorsements for Collins, they're rolling in. So
Yeah.
what does that say about Kemp's influence at this point?
Ooh, look at you, Lisa.
Is
Look
it
at you
waning?
putting me in a corner here.
What is it saying?
Good
What
job.
is it
That was a
saying?
good question. I think it's hugely important. You're getting at something that I think is one of the meta issues in all of this. Governor Kemp is, pardon the repetition, I say this all the time, but it is true, and it is hugely important in Georgia politics. He is the gold standard in brands in Georgia politics. He is what you want, maintaining 60%-ish approval ratings in a really competitive state. That's impressive. And what he says matters here, right? He has a great platform and he has credibility. When he says something, Georgians, even those who don't like all his policies, listen and they respect where he's coming from. And that matters. But it doesn't matter what your approval rating is. You can't maintain all of your political capital going into your final year of your final term as a governor. It is going to begin to dissipate. There is no one who can defy the laws of political gravity. And that is what we are seeing here. People are beginning to look toward 2027. What happens after this next cycle? How am I going to align myself? And maybe my interest and Brian Kemp's don't align exactly, even though I admire him and I support his agenda and I've been a proud donor to him, all of those things. Even one of Governor Kemp's floor leaders in the General Assembly has endorsed Mike Collins. And I'm sure that was a tense conversation. I hope that no one had 12 beers because that probably would have been explosive for that back and forth. But, Kemp's not going to be able to wage a proxy war in this Senate race. That's how kind of the national media is setting this up as a proxy war between Kemp and Trump. That is not going to be good for the Republican Party. Kemp doesn't want that. I hope Trump doesn't want that. Where Kemp can be helpful is kind of sending his donors toward Dooley. Tharon mentioned 20, 30, $40 million. No one's going to get that in the primary, right? I mean, whoever the nominee is, the money's going to pour in because the stakes are just too high. I mean, control of the Senate could be on the line. Ossoff's seat is the most vulnerable Democratic incumbent seat. The money's going to be there. Can you get to 10 to 15 million for the primary? We know Buddy Carter's going to put in 10 by himself. That's not counting whatever someone else gives him. So I think that 10 to 15 million is going to be important. But what matters more than most, and this only matters in a U.S. Senate race and a governor's race in Georgia. There's enough money spent that people know you in those races, and they got to like you. And you got to perform. You can't just outspend everybody like you can in a Secretary of State's race or in a congressional race or an Attorney General's race and win. You've got to do more than raise the most money. People are going to hear about you in earned media. They're going to see you in long-form videos. They're going to see your rallies or your political events, and they're going to draw their own conclusions about you outside of what you pay to tell them on TV, radio, mail, digital. So that is something where we don't know yet. And I talked to the Dooley people over the weekend, and they were like, just see him first. Before everybody gets out there and bashes the guy, see him. And I totally agree. And I think Tharon would back me up. I've been saying that for 2 months. I said, I'm concerned if I'm in their shoes that I'm being defined negatively before I get a chance to put my face forward. But now that they're in, they've got to land on those 2 feet this week and make a good impression. And one thing I was looking for there was, what was he going to say about Trump? And, the quote in the release today was, I've never seen a president accomplish so much in my life. He's obviously going to plant a flag and not allow a lot of gray area between him and Donald Trump, even though Trump's not with him. That's smart. That's good politics. And let's see what the next steps are. Let's dig a little deeper. We don't know today, but I think we'll know within the next month.
Yeah, he's not talking about Governor Kemp, though. He's talking about Trump, right?
He can say, I'm a Kemp Republican. That's fine. I think you see Chris Carr using that messaging in his campaign. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. But he's got to be his own man. And one thing that I've been saying in media, knowing that some of them out there listen, is if you have a rollout news conference, Brian Kemp can't be standing there, right? You can't look like you're the junior employee, like you're the vice president of this company, right? You got to go out there and be a U.S. senator or someone who looks like a U.S. senator standing on your own 2 feet. And that is what we're seeing so far. Good moves, good rollout thus far.
So, Lisa, there's an Athens connection here. And I shared this with B-Rob last week. My brother knows Derek Dooley. They went to high school together. And I think we're onto something here about what type of campaign this could be. When you ask about Derek Dooley in the Athens circle, no one has anything bad to say about the guy. I mean, I've asked white, Asian, Hispanic college professors, my brother's friends, and what they say is that the guy was cool. Like, he played football. He was one of us. And B-Rob and I always talk about this. Like, when we played for the legendary coach Billy Henderson back in the 90s, I never knew who was Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Tea Party, QAnon, none of that stuff, right? Because we were all united as young, men at the time, young adults, and we wanted to go win football games. So I think that what Brian is hinting here is that what type of campaign this is going to be. I think there are striking similarities between Derek Dooley and Brian Kemp, which is, will he run a campaign that's inclusive to not just white male super voters in the Republican primary and female voters, right? Will he try to expand? But B-Rob said something here, right? Chris Carr talks about Brian Kemp, but he also talks about his own record. I think Derek Dooley will not only be able to talk about Kemp in a way, and I agree with B-Rob, I think he's got to be his own man. I'm sure Brian Kemp told him that too. Hey, man, you got to run your own campaign, be your own man. But how comfortable is he with people outside of the GOP, MAGA extremists? And I think that that's a lane for him. So I want to, I don't want to beat up on Derek Dooley. I don't think I've ever met the man. Wouldn't know him if I see him. But what I'm hearing from the folks who know him best growing up in Athens, Lisa, cool guy, don't think he's racist, was a team player, never allowed the Dooley name to make him feel like he was, sort of superior than everyone else. But here's where I go next. I keep going back to this. What has he been doing the last 13 years? And why now? Why do you want to, let's assume he's been making money. He's a Dooley, so we know he ain't hurting. He ain't broke. But what has triggered you to want to go and be one of an elite 100 people to run? Now, is it I'm bored? I've always run, for office. I've always wanted to run. His mother is well respected in the Republican circles. I'm tired of being at home. I want to go do something. Like, what is going to be the reason why you are running? Because we know about because we know about Mike Collins is running, right? He wants to be the workhorse for the MAGA extremist agenda. Buddy Carter said, hey, I'm a MAGA warrior. I mean, we know why these folks are running, but why is Derek Dooley running? And to your point about giving an opportunity to see him, Brian, he's got to hit that. The last thing I think that this whole coach you fired as a coach, one of the things that you don't want to do in any profession is be fired. And you were fired. I think he went on to be like a Dallas assistant coach for the Dallas Cowboys. But I keep going back, like, you're a Dooley, man. Like, he really don't have to do anything. That's my whole point. Like, he can literally ride off into the sunset and do anything. But this whole attack on him being a fired Tennessee football coach is thematic in a way because it's also showing there's a failure in his leadership. He can't lead. And you failed to lead in 2012. But I think he has an opportunity here, though, B-Rob, because he can say, hey, you know what? I'm not like those guys in Washington. They passed that big, beautiful bill. We saw a poll, 52% of Georgians don't like this bill, is going in the wrong direction. And Lisa, I got to get this in. And B-Rob know it was coming. Goldman Sachs just reported this week that we're on the verge of having one of the worst economies that we've ever had. Trump spazzes out. And you get some bad numbers, and he wants to go fire the person who, produced the numbers. Like, the numbers don't lie. So there's a way for him to tie Buddy Carter and Mike Collins to Trump in a way that he's not tied to. But he ain't crazy. You got to show the man some deference. You got to show him respect. Last thing I'll say is this, and I'm going to say this on this podcast. I believe that Brian Kemp's legacy is so much on the line, Lisa, that he knows how to deal with Trump. Remember, I talked about this political abusive relationship they've been in now for a long time. The bromance is being tested. I can see a possible endorsement that if Dooley comes out and raises money, and we know that Carter and Mike Collins are going to make a mistake, Trump doesn't want to lose in this race either. So I just don't. I wouldn't totally rule out that Trump won't endorse Derek Dooley because he doesn't think he can win. I think that if Brian Kemp has learned what he learned from Kelly Loeffler, he's traveling around the state. As he tells me, I'm in the hood, I'm in the neighborhoods, right? He's talking to people as he goes around the state. There could be a possibility where we could see this go to a runoff, and then will Trump engage? But the question I would ask B-Rob is that, do you think Trump will engage in this race sooner than later? Or does he wait and see if it actually goes to a runoff, or he waits closer to next year to see how the money is going and what the mood of the electorate is like? Because if Trump numbers are down, he could be a lame duck. Maybe they may not want his endorsement because these job numbers and the way we're going, if it doesn't go up, they may want to stay away from him.
They're setting me up there. He knows that's BS, which is funny. That's good for you. Good for you there. Of course they want Trump's endorsement. Of course they do. A couple of things to unpack there. Good job with that. So Derek Dooley is getting in, and Brian Kemp is supporting Derek Dooley on the theory that they don't think Mike Collins and Buddy Carter get the deciders, that they can get the 48% of the Republican base, but they just simply can't get over the top. They are saying, we believe Derek Dooley is that guy who mano a mano can go against Jon Ossoff and get the deciders and get to 50+1 and retake the seat. So that is their viewpoint on this. Mike Collins got into this because he could clearly see that Buddy Carter wasn't getting Trump's support, because if Trump was going to support him, it would have happened a couple of months ago, and we would have avoided a lot of this if Trump and Kemp had been able to get both rally behind Buddy Carter or both rally behind John King. It didn't happen. So Mike Collins knows that Trump's not happy with the choices that he has in front of him. So he's getting in on the belief that he can get Trump's endorsement, and that's going to be enough to get him through a primary. And then, obviously, in their eyes, they think that they can win a general. But right now, they think that they've got the pole position in the primary because Donald Trump is on the sidelines, and they believe that when he weighs in, and he likes to weigh in, right? We got to bake that in. He doesn't want to be on the sidelines. He wants to be involved. And Mike Collins is the kind of guy that Trump likes. So we could very well see Trump come in and endorse Mike Collins in this race. And Derek Dooley's calculation is that Kemp's support sort of balances that out, that Derek's not left on an island. Trump's over here and Derek Dooley's by himself. Derek Dooley's aligned with the best brand in Georgia politics. My question in all of this is, does Kemp's brand for Dooley equal Trump's brand for a theoretical Collins endorsement? I think that's a really hard argument to make. Kemp is wildly popular. I don't know that a governor's approval ratings are transferable to their chosen choice. Trump is the head of the party, period. He is in the White House. There is no governor, no U.S. senator, no anything that competes with that. Trump is the voice of the party. And if you don't like it, well, you're probably not in the party, right? So I think Collins' calculation makes a lot of sense there. But Kemp is doing this because he wants to win this seat, and he is telling us, I think, of those who are in this, Derek Dooley is the one I think can beat Jon Ossoff. Do vote, and Tharon and I have had this conversation a good bit on this show. Do voters think like that? Are they strategic? Are they like, I want my party to win more than I want my guy or gal to win? I'm going to vote for the guy that I think the deciders in Georgia will go for.
I go back to this, Lisa. Why would Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, pick this guy? And I think we got to give him a chance to land on his feet, right?
Yes.
Let's let him get
Absolutely.
out here.
Let's see.
But the other thing that, too, what we don't know about Derek Dooley, right? What kind of counterpuncher is he? Because Mike Collins is going to hit. Buddy Carter is going to hit back, too, now, because, we just haven't really seen him on that statewide stage. From what the people tell me down in the southeast part of the state, Buddy Carter doesn't shy away from his conservative values. Mike Collins and his people, right? You said those volunteers, they hit me on Twitter, they tagged me. I thought that was funny. Okay, thank y'all for listening, appreciate it. But Derek Dooley may be a damn hell of a counterpuncher, and you don't come out here and be a Dooley. He's been getting football hit in the mouth his whole entire life, right? Can you imagine the pressure you have on you as being Vince Dooley's son? So Kemp got to know that Derek's got it in him, B-Rob. That's kind of where I'm going. Like, and I just don't think that, because look, Brian Kemp, the governor could have actually waited. He could have let Derek Dooley announce and let it kind of play out a little bit. But to put your support on a unannounced, an unofficially announced candidate that soon, there's got to just be some tangibles there. And then last thing I'll say is this. I think that Governor Kemp knows something that's going on. You're right. You set it up perfectly, B-Rob. It's who endorsements matters the most, Governor Kemp's or Donald Trump. I think on this day, I'll say Donald Trump does. But I think what Kemp is banking on is, will Donald Trump's endorsement mean as much next May? And I think that is going to be the question. And Kemp also has got a government, because if Kemp has a bad session and he starts to look a little shaky, then will his endorsement matter as much? So right now, I think that it helps Dooley. You have to take it because it instantly gives him credibility with donors. And you've already said, I mean, you see some of his floor leaders, some of his most loyal people come out and go with Mike Collins. But you know Brian Kemp like I know him. Those calls, as you've indicated, are some tough calls I'm sure people are getting. And one thing I know in politics, Lisa, it's hard to tell the governor of Georgia no. Because when they get you on the phone and start laying into you, the speaker, lieutenant governor, it's hard to tell them no.
Hard to tell them no. Hard to tell them no. All right. Well, some good perspective this week. And before we get out of here today, I do want to mention this whole thing going on with the Kings, the King family. You know, we've got Janelle King sitting on the state election board and her husband running for Secretary of State. And this is turning into quite a mess. And I just wanted to quickly get your thoughts on this. Brian, you up first.
Yeah, obviously, we've seen Kelvin King, Janelle's husband, roll out his campaign for Secretary of State, which included some direct attacks on the current occupant of the office. As well, you could infer attacks on Gabe Sterling, who we anticipate will be a candidate in the race as well, an opponent to Kelvin King. And then you've got his wife, ostensibly on the state election board, echoing some of that same messaging, attacking the Secretary of State's office. Now, she can clearly argue that I am an appointee. I have a right to my own opinion. My husband and I may agree, but I have every right to say this as an appointed official. And I think the people who appointed her get to have a say in that. I think the public can have a view on whether or not that's appropriate. I could argue either side here. I do think that once the legislature is back in session, her appointment is the House appointment. The governor gets somebody, the House and Senate all get somebody. So the House may take a look at what they think is appropriate. Do they think it's okay for a spouse of a candidate to be on the state election board and be able to kind of echo the same messaging, one from a campaign and then another spouse from an official appointed position? I think it's a fair debate to have. And she certainly, if nothing else, put a target on herself by doing this.
Look, I actually had I wouldn't call it a pleasure, I guess, but, I had the opportunity to debate her for a while on another show in Georgia Gang. And, Janelle, listen, she's very clear on where she is with her politics. This is a woman who's a Republican, African-American female Republican, who has some conservative values, right? And, we've debated them before. She was all in with Trump in the 16 race, 20 when he lost. She was all in then. I don't think Trump treated her and Kelvin fairly, actually, because they were one of the few black couples that were out there at that time, but it actually paid off for them in the first term. So I don't know what the relationship is now between them and Trump. But to Brian's point, here's where I think the conflict is there. And this is where it gets very, very interesting for them. It's a slippery slope. You can't have your wife on the you can't have your wife on the state board of elections pushing a Trump agenda. They just brought up that they wanted to go and bring up more information, more research into what happened in the 2020 election. And Brian has told them this. I've told them this. The more you talk about the outcome of 2020, it hurts Republicans. So I don't think that the smart Republicans are encouraging this board to go after this. But clearly there's a faction within the Republican Party that are still having some concerns about this election, that they believe that there was some cheating, even though it's all been proven that it was none. But then your husband goes and decides to run for Secretary of State. That's fine. What you then have to do is relinquish. You have to kind of remove yourself from that part of the campaign So when Kelvin is going after the Secretary of State's office, i.e. Gabe Sterling, she's now being seen, I'm hearing, around the state with them. Now, it's tricky.
They're out in public together.
Yeah. So I think the thing would be, and this is kind of how I would have a conversation with my wife. Hey, baby, I'm about to go, run for this statewide office. Hey, look,
split for a minute.
I need you, but hey, it may not look right if I'm out here attacking the office in which you guys have had conflict with. You see what I'm saying? So why don't you just do your thing over there? Like, you keep criticizing them from that position and let me, and that's free advice for them, right? I'm putting them up on game.
Right.
Just don't be with the man. I mean, because I think that's where the perception and the conflict lies, is that are you using information or your position on the state elections board to then encourage your husband to run against the very constitutional entity that you've had conflict, the optics of it. It's just really bad. And then last thing I'll say is this. I mean, look, if Janelle got all this to say, she maybe should run. I mean, a lot of folks say that.
Totally.
Like, a lot of people, and nothing against Kelvin, look, I'm always respectful to the brother. We don't see eye to eye on the politics, but I actually think that her conduct may actually hurt his campaign because maybe they're thinking that she's helping him. I think this man went to the Air Force. He's played football. If you talk to Kelvin, Lisa, he ain't no shortage of confidence with this guy. He can actually speak for himself.
Yeah.
Right. I just think they're creating an unnecessary conflict with the optics. And her word was in one of the articles I read is that if he wins, then that's a different conversation.
That's a different discussion, right?
I think that maybe they've gotten some legal opinion and say that's the right thing, but ultimately I think that Kelvin can stand on his own 2 feet. And Janelle, don't get me wrong, she is a force. She is a Republican force. And the speaker put her on this, B-Rob. And if the speaker is going to ride out with her, man, he must be, fine with it. But he also she puts him in an interesting position because she is Speaker Burns' appointee on this board.
Yeah. But they risk canceling each other out, though, don't they, in the long run?
I don't know. I think
maybe.
I think she, if anything, right now, just from a practical point of view, they believe she's amplifying his message. And if you like what we're doing here on the state board of elections, you're going to love what my husband does as Secretary of State, right? So it's definitely trying to speak to a certain segment of the primary electorate. So I do think there's strategy involved, and I don't necessarily even roll my eyes at that. It's just kind of how some of this works sometimes. I think the rest of us have to make a determination on whether or not it's fair, whether or not it's ethical, whether or not it's right. And I certainly, if I'm in her shoes, I would make the same argument. Look, what difference does it make? He's not Secretary of State, right? I have a right, my husband has a right to speak our political views. We have, that is perfectly okay. And if he becomes Secretary of State, then we have a conflict and I'll roll off. Actually, that's not a crazy argument to make. But as Tharon said, this is the House's appointment. And the House right now is not in session, so they can't make a move on this appointment. There can't be a vote in the House to remove her and replace her with someone else. That changes in January. So there is that opportunity should they want to, put in somebody else. And obviously the House doesn't want to get involved in other people's politics, right? The House has enough politics of its own. But, they don't want to take off somebody that Trump calls a MAGA fighter or MAGA whatever for him and replace him with somebody who you would have to think isn't a MAGA fighter, right? Or isn't in on Trump's side. So that's tricky politics for the House. I think Kelvin being in the race gives them a non-political reason for it. You can kind of get outside of the Trump stuff, get outside of all that and say, look, this is just simply because it's a conflict of interest. And, thank you for your service. You've done a great job. You've raised some great points. Thank you for your champion of election integrity. And now we're going to find a new champion of election integrity whose husband isn't running for Secretary of State.
And Lisa, I think Brian just laid it out. And look, don't underestimate Kelvin and Janelle. This is a couple who I think early in the morning, late at night, they're plotting.
Powerhouse. Yeah,
they're powerhouse, right? But the thing is, I'm just going to take it there. They, you know what I mean when I say they, have been doing it for decades in Georgia, right? This is not the first time a spouse has been in a position and the other spouse runs for office. I don't know if they're going to be able to get away with it. You know what I'm saying? And I know that when Janelle and Kelvin hears it, they're going to say, oh, Tharon always got to bring race into it. Well, you know what? This is Georgia, and race is involved in everything. And what I'm going with this is that can you get away with other Republican couples have been able to get away with in the past? And I think that the difference is if Trump has blessed this, if Trump knows what's going on and he's okay with Kelvin running, and then the speaker has got in the House has got a tough choice to make, right? Because to your point, now you've kind of complicated things. And then the question I have to ask myself is the speaker aware of all this? Because I don't think that he would have appointed her to do some things that she's doing. Now, has Kelvin running for Secretary of State been an equation? We all know he had a very bad showing in the U.S. Senate race. I think he came in next to last place. So is the Georgia GOP ready to elect a black man as their nominee for Republican Secretary of State? So it's got to be some calculated risk here. And maybe they got some polling or something that believes by attacking Gabe and attacking the Secretary of State's office and using her position to attack as well. And Kelvin saying what he's saying, that can drum up enough support for them to win the nomination. And if they're trying to win the nomination, I just don't think that they are going to be able to get away with what others have been able to get away with in Georgia, because there's going to be enough white people that are going to be outraged about this. And I think they're going to put a lot of pressure on the speaker to make a hard decision in January.
What's Gabe saying? I haven't heard. What's Gabe saying?
Well, Gabe's not in the race yet, and so he's very wisely kind of like
quiet,
letting it play out.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's certainly aware that media has been covering all of this, but he's just not in a spot right now to go out and get into the
Say
ring.
anything.
He will have to at some juncture, right? I do want to say a couple of things. Some great analysis there from Tharon, and yes, race does matter, and it's always really interesting in a Republican primary, but race didn't matter so much for Kelvin in 2022. I'll remind Georgians that the person who won that race that Kelvin finished last in was Herschel Walker, a black man who got 70+% of the Republican votes in that primary. So that's really that race wasn't the determining factor there. One thing to think about in the Secretary of State's race is we're going to have this U.S. Senate race, which we just talked about, right? Tens of millions of dollars going to be spent by all sides. You're going to have Democrats spending tens of millions of dollars for the governor's race and Senate race, Republicans in the governor's race too. Well, all this money is going to be spent at the top of the ticket. It's going to be really hard for somebody running for Secretary of State to raise $3 million. It's going to be really hard, even if you have $3 million, to use that to break through with a message to voters. Extraordinarily difficult unless you're in a runoff by yourself. That's the only way people are going to pay attention to the Secretary of State's race. So if you don't have paid media, and whatever paid media you do isn't enough to move voters, you have to touch voters a lot for a message to sink in. A lot of this buzzy stuff begins to matter. The buzzy stuff doesn't win elections normally if voters are tuned in, but in this case, it might be really helpful if people are talking about you in whatever capacity. It could also be really hurtful to you if they're talking about you and they view it negatively. But doing this stuff outside of money raising in a campaign that's down ballot is meaningful in this race.
You know what, Lisa, Brian just said something. Let's stop talking about Kelvin and Janelle and all this and Gabe, who not even in the race yet. We're giving them all this free earned media of what these situational analysis. But I think I go back to what I said earlier this week. It's just going to be a hot mess on the Republican side with all of these races. I mean, it is going to be attack after attack after attack. What Democrats got to do is stay united, have an uncomfortable conversation about who he or she is best for us to nominate up and down the ticket. Ossoff is our guy, but everyone else is open. And we just got to put together a message that shows Georgia voters that we're fighting for them and for something. And while the Republicans are going to continue to criticize incumbents, cater up to Trump, there's a lane for us to really take. And I think that we need to stay united as much as we can and show people that we can lead if given an opportunity in the state.
Are they listening to you, Tharon?
Oh, they are listening to me because, folks know if you dial my line or you try to clap back at me for something I said, I'm tired of looking good losing. I'm tired of raising all this money and getting 47% of the vote. You know what, Lisa Rayam, right now, if you ran as a Democrat in Georgia, right now, if you decide, you know what, out of all my career in journalism, being this great anchor, WABE, if you ran statewide right now against any Republican, you're going to get 47% of the vote. Period. Yeah.
That's your floor. That's your floor.
That's your floor.
Yeah, that's my floor. I'm going in.
So sometimes the math got to math. And we just need some more white people. We need some more Hispanics. We need some more Asian. We need more young people. We need more rural people. So we got to nominate people that can go and build that coalition. So not everybody's listening to me, Lisa, but when folks go quiet sometimes, I know they be talking. They be we used to call it sneak dissing in the back sometimes. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to win, and I think that this is a winning formula that we got to put together.
Yeah, and what Tharon is talking about is what I was talking about at the top of the show. Democrats got to get the deciders too, right? We are both fighting for that group, and he and I see eye to eye on that. And I'll say I can't let Tharon say that it's just a hot mess on our side. We're going to have slugfest, and I'm not going to hide.
It's just beginning.
It's going to be nasty and fun. We're going to have so much fun stuff to talk about on this show for the next year.
Yeah.
But the thing is, Democrats got to nominate a candidate for governor, the race that is monumental here in the state. And the only way that Mike Thurmond, if he gets in, and Jason Estevez can break through is they got to take down KLB, Keisha Lance Bottoms. So they're going to have to fight. They're going to have to go after her. They're going to attack her record as mayor. And so they're going to have a hot mess on their own. They just don't have the money in the bank yet to do it. It's coming.
Wow. It's going to be interesting. All right, guys. Thank you for some good talk. So let's do it again real soon. Have a good one.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.